If you haven't been to that space, I've been to a few business events there, and it really is a striking space because the way you guys do the lighting, going all the way up the walls and high ceilings.
20-foot high walls of wine and candlelit. They get up on the ladders and put candles all over the place. It's really fun. My office happens to be right up in the loft overlooking that, so I can keep an eye on things. I like to keep an eye on all my children.
What's going on, Sarasota? My name is Brad Hannon.
Trey Martel.
Felipe Colon.
And we've got a very special guest we want to get to here in just a moment. But before we do, just want to give a shout out to Sarasota Food and Beer, Tweeds Custom Suits, and Tominator Law for the sponsors. Check those guys out if you haven't, and check this guy out if you haven't, because we've got Michael from Michael's on East and several other organizations as well. But everybody knows you from Michael's on East. How you doing, Michael?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. I think I told you when you first came in, you guys catered my wedding. So that was probably my first experience with Michael's on East. But what I didn't know is that you guys were in the top 100 romantic restaurants. When did that come out?
It came out this year, I think after the first of the year, and it was done by Open Table, which is the major restaurant reservation system, and they put out some questionnaires to their guests, and we popped up. It was a great surprise.
And this was across the state of Florida?
Across the country.
Across the country, wow. And this isn't one of those People's Choice Awards that isn't really People's Choice, so you kind of buy your way into it.
One.
I love it. That's very cool. Well, I think in the pre-show we talked a little bit about, what makes it romantic and all that stuff. What I'd really like to dive into first is more so than just Michael's on East, because we'll talk the restaurant and Forks and Corks and all that, but really just your involvement with the community. I didn't know that you were involved with the Bay Preserve Project and all of the things you're doing. So what drives this? And I think this is a commonality, a common thread between the groups. So I want to start with this. What drives the sense of, giving back to the community for you?
Well, I'm lucky. I grew up here. My dad moved us to Sarasota from Buffalo, New York, when I was 12. The next year, he was an orthodontist in Buffalo, didn't know anything about running a hotel, bought an aging beach resort on Longboat Key called The Colony. Didn't know the first thing about running a hotel, but took it over. And the first year we had a few interesting experiences with a tornado, a small hurricane touched by, and pretty much took out most of what was there.
Oh my goodness.
So he came up with the idea to build a hotel with all suites. This was 1970, which was pretty unique in those days, which ultimately became the Colony Beach and Tennis Resort, the #1 tennis resort in the world.
Wow.
So I grew up there. I grew up on Longboat Key. Coming from Buffalo to Sarasota and Longboat Key was like going to heaven, if you can imagine. Growing up on the Key, I was either on a surfboard, a tennis court, a water ski, or a golf course.
That's awesome.
And completely different. So, I grew up in the hospitality business. Sundays when we were kids, Dad would host a cocktail party, and for all the guests that were staying there were times in Septembers where there might have been 4 people, but we would still do it. And so, getting dressed up in a coat and tie to greet people was something that attracted me. Started out washing the windows of that restaurant right on the beach, which was not fun most of the time. Graduated to washing the dishes, working in the cleaning the rooms. My dad believed that if we were going to be in the business, we had to know how to do everything.
Yeah.
And so pretty much we did everything. So
That's
growing
awesome.
up here, I appreciate our community. I appreciate the people that are here, and I appreciate how special it's become because we are, we're the center of the universe for the performing and cultural arts in Florida now. I like to think that we're also one of the great centers for great cuisine, and hence the Sarasota Manatee Originals, which we'll talk about a little bit.
Absolutely.
But when you have an opportunity to give back to a place that's given so much to you, that was the inspiration for me to commit the time and effort to help found the new Bay Park in Sarasota.
Wow.
A lot of people know your name, Michael Klauber, and not just because you have an eponymous restaurant, Michael's on East, right? But you also, I would say, and we do a lot of this on our podcast, I'm going to say things that probably you would not say, but that I think a lot of people would agree with, is that there are a few families and people and partnerships that have left more of a mark on the Sarasota food and wine scene in the last 50 years than you. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And whether that's Michael's on East Restaurant, which has performed at a very high level in fine dining for 30 plus years, to your newer ventures, the Cellar, and even your philanthropic work in the community that you probably don't talk about as much, but I know I've been at some of those events where you're running the auction. I mean, you really do a lot of things for a lot of people, and we're grateful to have you. And I think Sarasota both needs to know, if they don't know who you are and what you've done, they also need to know you as a person and how kind of you've been able to do that, and what that says about our community and what's come to become the Sarasota lifestyle generally. I know that's a mouthful, but that's kind of what I think is most interesting about all the things that you've done. It's not just that you've affected Sarasota, but I think Sarasota's affected you and kind of shifted you in some of those directions. You want to talk a bit about that?
Like I mentioned, growing up in the hospitality business, my brother and sister grew up with it as well, my younger brother and sister. We all ended up in it in some way. But, the philosophy that I try to live by is you give more than you ever expect to get back. And it's been a special gift to be able to help the community in a lot of different ways. I've contributed my time to lots of different organizations, and you're right. I'm not a professional auctioneer, but years ago when we were catering a big gala, probably 15, 20 years ago, I was there, we were catering it, and the auctioneer didn't show up. And so our social editor for the Herald Tribune said, "Oh, well, Michael, you could do that. Get up there and do that." And I got thrown into it. This last season, I did 13 auctions. Helped raise well.
So now you are an auctioneer.
Now, what's your auctioneer voice like? Do you have like a?
I'm not a cattle caller.
Okay,
I make it fun. I can pick on people because I know so many people in the crowd. Typically, there's a Michael's on East item towards the end of it that I can help raise a lot of money for. But raised well over $1 million, probably closer to $2 million for different nonprofits in our region this year.
I've seen it in action.
I love it.
And I think even better is not that you just know the people, you know who you can pick on a little bit more and who you probably need to lay off of.
Yeah.
Right.
Man, and we
like to pick on Felipe around here, just in case you're feeling feisty.
I allow them to pick on me. There's a lot of material here.
You know what's unfortunate about just learning that he's got this auctioneer skill is we have a SpeaX 1-year anniversary party coming up in 2 years, right? We've got a bunch of great sponsors. We're giving away some raffles, but if we would have known this in advance, then we could have auctioned some things and had a great auctioneer there. Maybe next time, right?
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
So Michael's on East opened in 1987. Was that your first venture, opening a restaurant?
So, as I mentioned, I grew up in the business. I ended up going to Cornell School of Restaurant and Hotel Management. Had a great experience there in Ithaca, New York.
That's a great school, by the way. I have a few friends that went.
And so he gets out of New
super
York
highly regarded
to Florida.
I got out of
ends
Sarasota.
up back in New York.
Yep. And then after college, I was hired by Sonesta Hotels, and as a management trainee, they sent me to Nolans. And notice I said Nolans. And I spent 5 years there training, working at the Royal Sonesta Hotel. And then my mentor, who was the general manager, bought Arno's across the street, which was a legendary restaurant that had really been let go. And spent 2.5 years there with him, restoring and reopening the landmark restaurant that today is really one of the greatest restaurants in New Orleans. So I learned a lot from that experience, especially learned about cash flow with him trying to get this restaurant open. Came back to Sarasota just to help out my dad at the resort for a little while before I was headed off to Dallas to another opportunity. And I walked into the offices one day and the food and beverage manager was gone, including all the furniture in his office. And for whatever reason, he disappeared. And my dad brought me up to his office and he goes, I'm a dentist. I've been at this for 10 years now. I've had 8 different food and beverage guys, and I'm either going to sell it now, I'm going to lease it, or you're going to take it over. And I said, Dad, I'm 24 years old. I don't think I'm ready to take the whole thing on. He goes, I promise I'll step back. You learned a lot. You can take it on. So, The only thing that he didn't tell me was that basically the restaurant was bankrupt at the time. So it was a turnaround effort. And so that was really my first experience being responsible myself. Spent 5 or 6 years there helping turn it around. At the same time, met my partner, Phil Mancini, who came in as a management trainee to work for me and basically never left. So Phil and I have worked together since 1980 or 81. But that was a great experience. And, after about 5 years, I realized that, I'd done everything you could do. We'd gotten every major national award. We got the famous Grand Award from the Wine Spectator. There were 20 of us in the whole country at that point that had that designation. So that was a big way to get people to come to Sarasota and think food and wine. That was the start of it. So, at that point, I said, maybe it's time for me to go out on my own, and an opportunity popped up, and our attorney came to speak to my dad and I and said, look, I got this great space. Yeah, it's on the back of this shopping mall, but, it looks like it could be a great spot for a restaurant. It was a hardware store at the time. And I said, I liked it. And long story short, I didn't have any money. My Dad wasn't, he was pissed. He was mad. He didn't come to my restaurant for the past 2 years.
He always losing his best employee, right?
Well, my brother and sister were
still?
I was
Were you doing both?
No, I stepped away.
Okay.
And left my brother and sister there. It was their turn, right?
You were close by.
I was close by.
Next up, right? They grew up in the industry too.
Still a family member.
Now, with restaurants, you hear all the time that they have a high failure rate. What do you think was the secret for you open your own restaurant on your own with your partner in 1987, and it's done so well for so long? What is that key ingredient that you mastered that others can't?
Well, first of all, I didn't have any money, so I did have to go out and raise money. No banks would talk to me. So I found 17 partners that contributed the money all in different amounts to help me get started. And basically that philosophy that I learned in New Orleans was run the business from the guest point of view. And my mentor, Archie Kasbarian, actually there's a dish named after him on the Michael's on East menu, is that philosophy he drilled into me. And it made sense because if you think about it, if you're running the business from the guest point of view, you can train your staff to do that and say, hey, if you're sitting in that chair, what would you expect? This restaurant has accolades, through the roof. And the expectations are very high coming in here. We're in the business of exceeding expectations. And it's easier to disappoint people than it is to hit that mark.
Mm-hmm. And they remember the disappointment a lot more than they remember the good stuff.
They do. And so, it's about that philosophy. So it starts for me, as a matter of fact, our shopper reports, we have secret shoppers that come in. It's 11 pages long. And it starts with the first phone call to the restaurant, the valet parker, the hostess, the greeting at the table, all the way through every step of the service. Did the manager come to your table? Did the owner pop by? All of those details are the things that I think set us apart. A lot of folks, and I know a lot of people in the industry, of course, across the country, will say that, but I know that we drive that home every single day with our staff. And it's easy for them to understand. It's also awesome because if they make a mistake, and if they were sitting in that chair, what would they expect to happen? We can back them up on that.
Yeah.
And so it really does help.
You were also kind of pioneering back then because that location, like you said, it was not, East Avenue off Bayou Vista was not the center of Sarasota, in the 80s.
That's why I had to put the On East on it.
Yeah.
So you could find me. I had a good following on Longboat Key, from the resort. But no, it was definitely, those first 5 years are a blur. Kids were born, don't remember a whole lot about that. But it was tough. It was very, very tough.
Now, a successful restaurant, some might argue, would, open another location potentially, right? I think I'm assuming, but it seems like maybe you went more into the catering and some of the other things. What was the decision like to say, hey, and I imagine it has a lot to do with that expectation and being able to exceed those, but what was the decision like to not open additional restaurants somewhere along the 37 years? Because that's a long time.
We've had other restaurants over the years.
But not Michael's on East,
But
correct?
not Michael's on East.
Or Michael's on West, for that matter.
No, or out East or whatever. Yeah, they've tried. But
I think with fine dining, it's kind of different. You know, usually like a really well-known restaurant, there's one, and then maybe they do other concepts or offshoots, but it's difficult to strike lightning twice. You know
If only we had an expert here to explain.
Everybody thinks
it was a question, Trey.
It's very romantic to be in the restaurant business to a lot of people until they really get into it, and it is tough. It's a very tough business, and it's still 7 days a week right now, but it's an exciting business, and every day is different. Every night is different. It's not cookie cutter. And we have had other restaurants. As a matter of fact, we had 3 restaurants at the Quay. We had a restaurant on Osprey Avenue where Libby's is. That was where my first liquor store was. First wine shop was over there. And so, we've had others. But what happened that really took us into the catering, first of all, my partner Phil, who I mentioned had come to work with me at the Colony, stayed. I didn't take anybody from the resort when I left. I wanted to still be a family member. And so Phil eventually left too. And long story short, came to me and said, "You've got this big kitchen. I want to do some catering. And could I work out of the back of your kitchen?" So we started working like that. And we were doing very well with the catering. In fact, the only things we weren't getting were the parties that we didn't have our own space for. Mm-hmm. Well, Midtown Plaza shifted at that time. The grocery store took over the south side of the building. It had been a shopping mall out there. It took out all the leases. I convinced the landlord to leave the doors and windows, and then my side of the mall, everybody left because there wasn't going to be any foot traffic. It turned out our building was built by Sears and Roebuck back in the 50s, and it's a brick you-know-what. And with 20-foot high ceilings, turned out there was space for a ballroom right there.
Nice.
So Phil and I got together, and I figured out a way to buy out the partners over time. And
These are the 17 people that gave you money.
the 17 people, yeah. A lot of them ate well for a long time, and some of them are still regulars now. And I invited Phil to become my partner at that point, 50-50 partners in 1993. And we were off to the races with the ballroom, with the catering. And it's a great partnership because he gets to do what he loves. He grew up in the catering business in Providence, Rhode Island, in one of the toughest towns that I've ever visited. And so it's, he gets to work the parties and your weddings. And I love the restaurant side of it, the marketing side of it, the wine and spirits side of it. So, we both get to do what we love every day. And so we've worked together, obviously, quite a few years together.
I think we could talk about Michael's on East for the entire length of the podcast. But I think, there's so many things that you're involved with and doing that we would be remiss if we didn't get to some of those things.
Let me sneak one more in.
So we're going to let Trey sneak one more in. And
if I'm going to take my fiance to dinner at Michael's on East, what meal would you suggest would be the most romantic meal we could get there?
Trey doesn't eat onions. He doesn't like peppers, tomatoes.
Just let him answer it. Let him answer it that way, and then we can make fun of
Well,
Trey.
I'd have to, first of all, have cocktails at the bar, at the lounge, and listen to the piano player. We've got a great couple of guys that play for us, primarily Joe Michaels, who's worked for me for 30 years. And then you'd have one of the special cocktails. We have incredible mixologists there. The spirits side of it is really strong for us because really we have access to just about anything because we also have the store. Mm-hmm. And so you would do that first, then you would sit down and you might think about ordering, if you want to go crazy, we've got beautiful fresh caviar. But a couple of the appetizers that are really special, steak tartare, beautiful shrimp appetizers. I would probably send something out special to your table, a little bit of special amuse-bouche. And
what's that, French?
That's French.
Okay, cool.
You're gonna maybe have some champagne or select one of the incredible wines we have 375 wines on the list. Beautiful wines by the glass to choose from, champagnes by the glass. So you'd get started out with that. One of our team would come over and help you make selections off the menu, but If you like seafood, I'd probably think about the either the sea bass or maybe my New Orleans friend mentor's dish, the Pompano Casbarian. Beautiful local fresh fish, incredible steaks, all from Allen Brothers in Chicago, which is the premier steak cutter in America. The big guys, the big chains could never access those steaks because they just don't they can't produce enough. So we've worked with them. So the steaks are incredible. We have a fabulous pastry chef, and the desserts are exceptional, and it's on site. So we bake and produce everything for the restaurant and for catering except the bread.
Wow.
Cool. So you're going to have a great meal and fabulous service from one of our
I'm excited.
servers.
I'm so excited. I might wear a collared shirt.
Okay.
I think your fiance wants to go with Michael now to the date. I want to go with Michael on a date. That sounds
good.
Ideal. Hey, listen, we are having an absolute blast here and get to know Michael from Michael's on East. If you would like to get to know him a little bit more, stay tuned for rapid fire questions fueled by food and beer.
I'm Michael Klauber from Michael's on East, and this is Rapid Fire.
10 random questions.
10 specific answers.
Nothing off limits.
This is Rapid Fire, fueled by food and beer. Everybody's got a nickname. What's yours?
Spivus,
Say what?
as in spy versus spy.
Southpaw, other paw, or faux paw?
Right-handed.
What percentage of the population are right-handed?
What do you like more, comedies or action?
Comedies.
They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
Whether it's Creed or Debbie Gibson, what's your favorite karaoke song?
Sympathy for the Devil, Rolling Stones.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man, will, and take.
You can only eat 3 foods the rest of your life. What are they?
Caviar, foie gras, and great steak.
Excellent choice, Mr. Bond.
What food did you hate as a kid, but you love now?
Liver, as in foie gras.
Besides base jumping without a parachute, what's on your bucket list?
Visit Bali.
Have you ever been mistaken for a celebrity?
Like Joey Fatone?
Yes, from Star Trek. What's his name? The captain, Captain Kirk.
Scotty, beam me up.
If there's a Mount Rushmore of actors, who's on it?
Tom Hanks. I think Julia Roberts is fun. Leonardo DiCaprio. I'm blanking out, guys.
King Kong ain't got on me!
If you were a professional wrestler, what would your entrance song be?
You can't always get what you want, the Rolling Stones.
You can't always get what you want.
So we talked a little bit about the restaurant. Obviously, we could talk about that for the entire length of the podcast. But what about the wine cellar? Let's talk about that a little bit, because Michael's on East, obviously great food, wine cellar, everything after, right?
Well, wine and spirits is a great passion of mine, especially wine.
Yeah.
Being able to be, trained in New Orleans about wines and then coming back to Sarasota and building the great wine list at the Colony, gave me access to incredible people in the industry. The wine industry is amazing around the world.
Yeah.
A side note is that my wife and I lead food and wine trips every year all over the world. We've led 42 groups to all parts of the earth for food and wine over the past 18 years. And so wine has been a great passion, and first had a wine shop on Osprey Avenue. And then there was space that opened up at Midtown that attached to where the back of the kitchen and the atrium, the ballroom was. And I went to Phil and I said, Phil, we got to get this space. I want to have a wine and spirits store right here. And he said, well, I think we need another banquet space too. We need more space for parties. And I said, what if we can do both? So I designed the store to be a store by day and an event space at night. Everything in the store, including the checkout counters, is on wheels.
It's crazy.
And it can we can move them. Eventually, the space next door opened up, and so we took that space and added to it. Really expanded the spirit side of it. So it really is a store by day and party room at night. It's the most romantic place for small events, up to 50, 60 people. We do a lot of wedding rehearsal dinners in there, wine dinners, wine tastings, monthly wine tastings in the store. We'll have 40, 50 wines for people to taste with some nice small buffet of foods to go with it. And
any caviar?
Might be garnished with caviar.
There you go.
But
if you haven't been to that space, I've been to a few business events there, and it really is a striking space because the way you guys do the lighting, going all the way up the walls and their high ceilings.
20-foot high walls of wine and candlelit. They get up on the ladders and put candles all over the place. It's really fun. My office happens to be right up in the loft overlooking that. So I can keep an eye on things. I like to keep an eye on all my children. But the wine business has been fantastic, and it's exciting for me. We travel the world exploring these different wine regions. South Africa happens to be a great passion of ours. We actually work with a family in Franschhoek, which is part of the Cape Winelands, and they produce private label wines for me for Michael's on East. So when you're at a party there and you see the Michael's label, that's from a great family in South Africa that we're helping support.
That's awesome.
So these are relationships that you built over many, many years, and that's why you're able to bring wines to your wine list at Michael's that others didn't have.
Right.
Tell us about how it was convincing people to bring their wines to Sarasota in the 80s. Sarasota in the 80s, I would assume, isn't the Sarasota that people know today.
It was a wine wasteland back then.
A wine wasteland. Wow.
And so I really did fight to get good wines because in New Orleans it was very French wine oriented.
Yeah.
But there was very little here. So, I reached out by telephone to a couple of restaurants around the state to ask them for some help, and only one returned my call, and it was Bern Laxer from Bern Steakhouse.
Oh, nice.
And he called me back and said, how can I help you? And I said, well, I'm at the resort, and I'm trying to build a wine list, and I can't find any of these wines, and you've got this great list, and, maybe you could point me in the right direction. He said, well, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, I'll come meet with you. He said, how about 10 a.m.? I said, great. By 10 p.m., I was still there, and he was calling friends in California, some of these boutique wineries getting extra allocations to be able to get for me.
Wow.
And I was off to the races with that. I traveled Europe. I went to France. I was in Burgundy and Bordeaux and made connections there, was able to get a lot of those wines in. And today, I actually sell Bordeaux as a future, as a commodity, which I'm involved in right this minute, as a matter of fact.
No kidding. And I think that's a great opportunity to segue into the other stuff you're doing with the Forks and Corks and the restaurant group. Is that where that passion came from? Like, is that how you developed that passion to give back and help, as a restaurant community because of that, simple act of kindness from Bern? The
fun of this business is getting people to explore new tastes and flavors, whether it's a dish in the restaurant or a wine or a spirit or a great beer. It's all about having people go away with a new experience. It drives me crazy when people come in and order the same wine all the time. I train my staff and I educate them so that they can recommend things that you're not going to see in other places. That's what Forks and Corks is, only on a much grander scale. So we're bringing in top winemakers that I have relationships with from all over the world, getting ready to send out the invites for next January's event right now. And, it's fun to get these folks to come in from all parts of the world to see Sarasota. Because in the beginning, when I got the grand award at the Colony, people were like, Longboat Key, Florida? They're used to seeing the restaurants in the big cities getting that kind of recognition, like, where's Sarasota? And what the heck are they doing with all that wine down there? And I would hear that from the wine guys, the winemakers all the time, but started to get them to come into town. But Forks and Corks was a brainchild when I helped found the Sarasota Manatee Originals 20 years ago, and how do we showcase the great restaurants in our community to a broader audience? How do we get guests to come in and try new things that they didn't ever have before? Whether it's wines from all different parts of the world, great foods, but all matched up with, these 60 plus locally owned independent restaurants. Growing up in the business, every other restaurant was your competition. But about 20 years ago, we realized that some of the big name chains were starting to look at Sarasota and our region. And so I got together a group of 7 other restaurateurs that I knew in town, and we decided to circle our wagons. There was this organization that started up out in Tucson, Arizona called Tucson Originals, and I said, we got to do that here.
Yeah.
And today, as I said, we work together. We realize that the guy down the street that's the independent is your asset. The more that we can bring Sarasota to the forefront of the public and the visiting public, the better we're all going to do. It raises all the ships at the same time. So it's always been, for me, about how to give back and, how to help others in the business so that we can, have Sarasota be this great food and wine destination. And today, I think we're definitely there.
How many members do you have in the Sarasota Manatees Originals?
62.
62. Now, what is the process, the litmus test? If Felipe and I decided to open a restaurant tomorrow, are you going to just let us join the group, or do we have to prove ourselves?
You have to be in business for at least a year. Okay. You have to get sponsored by a current member, brought to the table by a current member. You have to agree to participate in one free event a year, which is usually Forks and Corks. And we do a quarterly gift certificate sale where you contribute a certain amount of coupons or gift certificates each year that then we sell as at a discount. And so I was also able to get a couple of our big broadline distributors to contribute a percentage of our restaurant sales back to a marketing fund. So although we couldn't compete with the big chain restaurants, maybe on purchasing power, marketing-wise, we were able to level the playing field. So a lot of the little guys who could never afford a full-page ad in SRQ or Sarasota Magazine or the TV shows that we sponsor are getting that attention. So helping a lot of the little guys get going, that's juice for me. I love doing that. I love helping others in the industry.
Now, where can our audience go to find these gift cards from the restaurants to purchase?
Eatlikealocal.com.
Okay.
Are all 64 restaurants listed there?
Yes.
All right. That's our new hit list for Sarasota SpeaX guests.
Just think about Eat Like a Local and look that up. And you can look up Sarasota Manatee Originals too. But yeah, from the tip of Anna Maria Island all the way to Venice Pass.
Very
great
cool.
restaurants.
But you're right, because it feels like restaurant scenes live and die by how much they're able to have more than one or two great restaurants in the area, right? That's when you start to hear about a place in an article, in a magazine or a newspaper. It's because there's not one, not two, but maybe 3 or 4 great original concepts in an area.
Yeah.
It reminds me kind of like Soulard in St. Louis, or obviously there's tons of examples of that.
I'm curious, Michael, because you started this movement many years ago when there wasn't a whole lot of interesting concepts or concepts that were doing really well in the area. Now it almost feels like anybody with the concept can succeed in the restaurant business in this area. Perception-wise, I don't mean to say that they will and they are, but it feels like a lot of people feel like, hey, if we start a new concept in this area, it's going to take off because it's booming. Is there a tipping point where there's too much competition and everybody kind of suffers because of that?
We are full at this point, I would say.
Yeah.
And there are certain parts of town, Sarasota and Manatee County, that are soft right now. Mm-hmm. So it is important to support the locally owned independents. I mean, the money stays here. You're taking care of their families. They're contributing back to the community. They're donating to your charities. I mean, these are the people that really give back to the community and are the fabric of it.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is because I was talking to some local restaurateurs recently that had that same feeling. So it's interesting to hear your perspective as well.
I got kind of a, so your dad, Murph, is it? That was your dad's name? He made that Colony Club a destination along Will Key. I mean, there wasn't much out there back then, right?
No, there wasn't. There was nothing on either side of us or across the street.
Yeah, I can't help but see the similarities between you with the originals and kind of all the events you've started, kind of almost doing a similar kind of thing on a grander scale with the rest of town.
My dad was amazing. He was an amazing dreamer. The dreams that he created and some that he didn't get to create. I mean, he had a whole master plan for downtown Sarasota 20 years ago that was incredible if we would have had that today. He took the same concept to Tampa. He developed a few different condominiums, turning the Colony around the way he did. It was the first all-suite hotel in the United States when he rebuilt that. So he was an amazing dreamer and definitely an inspiration for me beyond all.
Great. Yeah, and in doing a little bit of research, I read just so many different things.
Great stuff.
He had his kind of hand in everything, right?
He did the master plan for the whole quay in 1972, and only part of it got completed. He did develop the Hyatt and one of the condominiums, but if you saw that master plan that he had for, which is now a mishmash of condos and all that, he had designed Neiman Marcus to be in there. He had water taxis, really unique things back then. I still have all the renderings of that. It was gorgeous.
I got to know, how does one get on the wine trips that you're doing?
You should become a member of the Gulf Coast Connoisseur Club.
Okay.
That's what it's called. And it's our loyalty program at Michael's on East and Michael's Wine Cellar, where you can earn points for every dollar that you spend that you can use at the restaurant and the wine cellar. And go. Also, it's the group that we organize our trips through.
Okay.
We travel the world. This year in October, we're taking 28 guests to Japan, and we're doing a 14-day cruise, Tokyo to Tokyo, with special stops and special experiences. The last cruise that we did, the captain took me aside on day 3 and said, you're really causing a problem. All our guests want to know, who's this Gulf Coast Connoisseur Club and how do we get to join them? Because our guests get to do special things that typically everybody else on the ship would not get to do.
Like what?
Like I'm bringing winemakers on board. We're doing private dinners in chateaus and castles and getting access to places that, you wouldn't normally get to visit. So
cool.
it is special. And we've got guests, we've got families that have been with us on 10, 15 trips and say, where are we going next?
I want to join that for sure. And when my wife sees this episode, I think we're going to have no choice but to get into the Gulf Coast Connoisseurs Club. Sign me up when you're there.
You're a self-proclaimed pizza connoisseur. Now you're an official wine connoisseur.
not official yet.
Before we move on to the community stuff, I kind of have a little curiosity. In one of the things I read, is it true that your dad at the Colony brought Bollettieri in to teach tennis?
Yeah, Nick Bollettieri was our house pro.
That's wild.
And so, and I used to take lessons from Nick. It was meant to be. And Nick came up with this idea. He had a couple of clients whose kids wanted to come and train with him. He convinced my dad to let him use one of the 2-bedroom suites in the back of the property. Actually, my stepsister, Carling Bassett, was the first. And Jimmy Arias from Buffalo, whose teeth my dad had straightened, was the other one. And so Dad helped him start the Bollettieri Academy. They did it together, and it ultimately has become IMG. So it was pretty amazing to see that grow and to see those two men working together on that. Not always on the same page, because they were both big personalities, but Nick was amazing. I used to love it. He loved to surf. And so sometimes when I would go for my lesson, he'd say, Michael, the waves are up. Let's go catch some waves instead of hitting balls today. So, he was a great man.
There was waves in the 80s on the Gulf Coast.
I was one of the Sarasota Ripple Riders.
Sarasota Ripple Riders.
They say it's harder to surf a small wave than a big one.
It is. Well, we tried.
Yeah.
But I love that story because I tell people, this town is a lot smaller than you think it is, right? And there's so many, if you go back far enough, there's so many connections and little vignettes like that kind of define how we got to where we are today. And IMG, that's the number one type of its That's the number one school of its type in the world.
It is.
No argument. And it also is the backbone of what's become kind of a sports economy in our area as these players come up there and then stay and they added sports and people buy homes here.
Look at all the folks that are moving here.
Yeah.
And, that's also thanks. I like to think that John Ringling had a lot to do with this. And, we think about him a lot because we hear the name Ringling, but there was a dreamer back in the 20s. And that was his dream for Sarasota to become an arts center. And look what it's done. I mean, our ballet is performing in 2 weeks in London at the London Opera House. Our Sarasota Ballet is featured at the London Opera House. We've got the ballet, the opera, the symphony. We're going to have a new performing arts center in the middle of the new Bay Park. There's a lot going on.
Why don't we talk about the Bay Park? Because we said we had Jamie Miller on before. We've kind of got into a little bit, but would love to hear your perspective. I just learned today that phase 1 is completed. So what's upcoming? What are the next things we're going to see there?
And tell us how you're involved as well.
Yeah, so I was on the Visit Sarasota County board for 7 years, and one of those years, we were going on a learning trip to Nashville, Tennessee, with a whole group of chamber people and EDC people. And, we had been touring this whole area of Nashville that was blighted, and they'd created a public-private partnership. And I got inspired, and I got back on the bus, and I had the county administrator on one side of me and the city manager on the other, John Thaxton in the front seat. And I said, guys, why can't we do something like that in Sarasota? And is anybody looking at, because I had experience at the Quay, and it had failed, and it was just a piece of dirt right then.
Right.
Why can't we do something with that? And what about the property that surrounds the Van Wezel and the park to the north? And they said, oh, well, we can't. We're thinking there might be some commercial development there. And, there's some other ideas, some plans that happened a few years ago that we want to dust off and maybe reconsider. And I got back and I said to Virginia Haley, who was our head of the organization, I said, we got to explore this. So I went and met with one of the city planners, and he created a Google map that showed that there was 4 parcels that I was talking about that equaled 75 acres. There was 75 acres in play at the same time, and nobody was looking at the big picture. And what were they going to say 50 years from now about the decisions that we could make to use those properties to its best advantage? And it started with that. And I went to our board meeting, our board retreat, and I had a big board made with the map on it, and the properties were all circled. And we talked about several other things. And when I presented the idea about trying to come up with a way to preserve that as a permanent public park, we were off to the races. And they sent myself and Virginia out into the community to start a conversation about it. That for me was a little over 400 meetings later. We created an organization called Bayfront 2020, Bayfront 20, because it was going to take clear, focused vision to get us to 2020, to get something done. And we were able to put together this group, which ended up being a little over 60 different social all kinds of organizations from all of our foundations. Everybody got on board with that. It was an amazing experience. And so we were able to raise the money locally to get that done. So phase 1, we opened up in October of 2022. Phase 2, we're working on right now. We've got plans out for bid for the area along the waterfront. And then it comes back down the Arts District, which is where the Civic Center and all of that property is. So we're going to basically creating a big donut around the space where the new Performing Arts Center is going to be built.
What kind of stores or shops is going to be?
There's no commercial on this property at this time. There is a concession at the Nest. If you haven't been to the Bay Park, you've got to go check it out. I mean, it is.
There's a kayak launch now, so you can.
There's a kayak launch. There's an incredible kids playground there. The Nest, which is a beautiful,
it's like a pavilion,
outdoor,
right?
Like a pavilion.
Yeah, that's where the concession is over by the
concession, which
Nest.
is the Sharkies group is doing that. They do a great job. It's great food. Everything that happens there is free too.
Yeah.
Whether it's a yoga class, whether it's a performance, Thursday night movie. So I was able to help get over 100 local businesses to contribute a certain amount each year that underwrites all of that. So everything is free, welcoming, and open to our entire community. Cool. The diversity of our community is all there. When you walk that park, you'll hear lots of different languages. You'll meet all kinds of people from different backgrounds. And it's really, it is something that 50 years from now, they're probably going to look back and say, wow, these guys were really thinking. This is going to be Sarasota's Central Park.
From what I understand, 75 acres coastal for a project like this is the largest in the whole state of Florida, or at least on the Gulf Coast side of Florida.
No, it was a huge property that a lot of people across the state were interested in developing.
Yeah.
And so the 53 acres that we were able to preserve is there in perpetuity forever. And it's funded by a TIF tax district that we were able to create that helps that. We've got an incredible board of directors, incredible support from all of our major foundations, and phase 2 is fully funded. It's just getting into the ground, getting the plans approved. You're going to be amazed at what this is going to end up being.
My kids love the park, so that works for that for sure.
We talked a little bit about the TIF district on another episode, and we like to have some cynical banter every now and then. But one time you said that all the events at the park are going to be free. I think that's amazing, and I think the word needs to get out even more about that, because then people will understand why we're going through all this trouble and why we have all these complicated financing mechanisms and all that. One of the knocks I often hear from especially younger families in Sarasota is that there aren't a lot of free things to do. This is, we have the arts, we have culture, we have great food and drink. Those can get expensive, as we know, right? But somewhere like in New York or wherever, they have a lot of free things in places like Central Park, and that kind of changes the vibe in a city, to have all those free amenities and things to do. So I think it's great that park is going to serve that purpose here.
And we're lucky that we have a community that supports that, because the whether it was $25 contributed to, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions from people, the support has been there and the pride is there about what's been created, and we should all feel proud.
Right, because the free still costs the community money. I mean, people have to buy into that to make that possible, to give everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, listen, being from Sarasota and being involved in Sarasota as long as you have been and seeing all the changes, I'm sure you have some opinions on this matter, but Trey's got a Sarasota-based question that we would like to ask. Okay. If you do look over there, you will be entranced and you'll be very tough to look away. But go ahead, Trey.
Well, Trey and Dominator Law want to know what your thoughts are on roundabouts. Do you love them or do you hate them?
In traveling in Europe, they're everywhere, and they do take some getting used to, but from what I've seen so far, it is helping traffic flow better.
I knew that was going to be the answer, for sure.
I mean, that's a good answer.
I also like roundabouts.
Well-traveled
because
answer,
I'm
right?
also cultured like you.
When Trey travels in Europe.
Any favorite roundabouts?
I mean, when I think of roundabouts, the first time I ever really drove in one was in Paris, and it was a Monday morning traffic, and it had been a very late night the night before, and I had to pick up a rental car and make a left-hand turn on the Champs-Élysées, heading towards the Arc de Triomphe, which is a giant roundabout with 6 lanes going around it. And I was on the inside lane heading towards that, not knowing how to get out. I couldn't get anybody. I had my turn signal on the whole time and nobody was going over. I went around the circle twice before I finally realized I just had to move and they would move out of the way. So that was my first experience with a roundabout.
A long night of R&D for the wines, right?
Yeah,
exactly. It's been extremely easy to get around roundabouts ever since the 6-lane roundabout, I'm sure. Yeah. Right?
Well, that's probably the world's most famous roundabout, I would think, right?
Yeah,
you can't beat that view.
See those bike racers when they do that? I love watching that.
I think we've asked a few people, and no one's let us even given us really a lead on this, but you seem to be somebody that could probably get something like this done. We want a Sarasota SpeaX roundabout, right? Every episode, 60 almost so far, we ask our guests what their opinion on roundabouts are. So we have become self-proclaimed experts. How can we get a roundabout named after Sarasota SpeaX?
I think if you could raise a few funds for it, you could maybe get the artwork would have your name featured on it. Yeah. That could go in the center of one of those.
That was Felipe's thought.
We're in touch with the Public Art Fund folks, and it's a process like everything else, and
If you have a logo, that could be the artwork in the center of one of those roundabouts.
There you go.
There
It
you
could
go.
be like a strong roofing logo.
Don't get me started.
Don't give him any ideas.
chance,
Do not
no
give him any
chance.
ideas.
I'll hijack this whole idea.
We also wanted to touch, did you have any new projects like what you're doing with Selby Gardens or things that maybe perhaps people didn't know that you were doing that they would find interesting in addition to all the other?
Why don't you speak specifically on Selby Gardens and the net positive?
Yeah. So in February, we opened up the Green Orchid by Michaels on East in Selby Gardens as part of the new phase, the first phase of the renovations of that property. It's very unique because it is the first solar-powered net positive restaurant in the world. I'm talking in the world. So entirely electric, entirely solar-powered. The kitchen has no gas and no fire. Everything is electric or induction. The commercial induction ranges are incredibly fast, faster than gas.
Wow.
And you can pick up the pan afterwards and put your hand right on it and not burn yourself.
No kidding.
It's incredible. That technology is amazing today.
Have you guys had cooked with induction before?
No, but do you think?
Of course.
Do you
It's the
think
best.
everything's going to move towards that, or what? Like
A lot of, and we'll think about a cruise ship.
residential
They don't
even
have,
too, or?
They don't have gas on
True.
cruise ships.
Yeah.
It's all electric.
I
so
wouldn't
that
know that
technology has
anyways.
been coming and coming and coming.
So that's the pro. What's the con? What's the counter argument for it?
It's energy efficient. Our hoods are heat sensor. They hardly ever have to kick in because
No, I'm looking for the other side of the
bad-
coin.
the
Yeah,
what-
what's the
bad
bad
part of
side?
it?
con.
It's expensive.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're expensive.
That's usually the bad part of
Yeah,
this.
and you assume that over time that the technology might catch up to where it's less
Yeah,
expensive.
well, it will. I mean,
Yeah.
the solar panels, I mean, this project took 5 years to get it done. The technology changed so much during that period that they had to keep updating, what they were going to put up on the roof. The other unique thing that we have is the entire roof of the restaurant. The solar panels are on the top of the parking facility, the green parking facility that they built.
It's the Leaf, not the parking facility.
The Leaf,
It's the
exactly.
I can't even remember. Something,
Yeah.
energy access facility.
Yep.
Great
Leaf.
marketing.
Yep.
It's not a parking deck.
The entire structure is going to be wrapped in green. So it's got the vines growing up, but it's going to disappear.
We talked about that pretty extensively. I predicted that they complained about it, but then it's going to be an asset to that community.
Yeah.
You watch.
And the restaurant has a huge roof over the top of it that is a fully managed organic producing garden. So a lot of our produce and specialty produce is coming from up there.
Wow.
It's organized, it's been planned, organized, and is being harvested by a group of veterans called the Operation Eco-Vets. So they organized the garden, they planted it. It's amazing. They brought down like 15 pounds of beautiful tomatoes, another 10, 15 pounds of other vegetables from up there this morning. And I love walking through the restaurant and showing it to people at the tables. They're blown away.
Yeah, that's super cool.
So it's a very fresh menu. We actually just started, and this is something to go on Saturday and Sundays in a lot of cities, going out to brunch for young couples and all that is fun. So we started a Saturday and Sunday separate brunch menu with all fan favorites. So it's a great place to go and, walk the gardens. There's always great shows going on there and enjoy some of our food. But how fun is it that every day, we're able to create a flatbread from things that came from right upstairs.
It's pretty cool.
It's nuts.
Yeah, farm to table's great. I mean, I wish there was more of that in town.
We're not just farm to table, we're roof to table.
That's even
A
better.
rooftop farm.
Yep.
Roof.
Well, in closing, we typically like to ask our guests for who they would prefer to see, but we like Felipe to do that
Oh, yeah. I mean,
because he has a certain thing that he can only say.
That's probably not true at all. But no, we always ask our guests, you see what we do here. We're trying to help people who Sarasota needs to know, tell their story. We're just looking for interesting people, leaders who Sarasota needs to know, who you think would be a good fit for what we do here.
John Thaxton.
Yeah.
Have you ever had John on here?
We have not.
He is a wealth of information and just an amazing guy. And he was really my partner in crime on the Bay Park, too, along with Virginia Haley.
I know he's a real authority on the environmental issues here, amongst other things. He's with the Sarasota Conservancy?
He's with the Gulf Coast Community
Okay,
Foundation.
that's what it is. I was confused.
I mean, he grew up in Sarasota. South County or South Sarasota, and he's got great stories, and he's an amazing guy.
Very cool.
You got any buddies left at IMG that might be?
I don't know a lot of the team there.
Trey's a big sports guy.
Yeah, but I've been out there to some of the events. It's amazing. We were there for lacrosse matches. Our nephew was in one of the competitions there last winter. I was blown away with all of that prop. Those were all fields. Those were all, they were growing strawberries out there.
Yeah.
There still are some fields nearby there. I mean,
they won't be there for long from what I can see.
They're being developed.
I just was at an insurance event, and one of my friends that's in Texas is actually in talks with IMG about a rugby program. He's South African, and they're discussing a rugby program through IMG now. So they're expanding into all different avenues. It's pretty crazy, but I'm sure we can get somebody from IMG on. Well, Michael, it was great to have you on. We really appreciate it. We know your time is valuable, and
thank you so much.
Certainly that story, getting that out to those that maybe don't know you, because what Felipe failed to mention there is the whole, if you don't know them, then you don't know them. I teed him up and he missed. So I'll fix it for you, Felipe. But we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on, and
all right.
Hope you enjoyed.
Awesome.
Thanks,
thank
guys.
you so much.
This was fun, and thank you for what you're doing for the community to get to really know the folks that are here.
Thank you.